Safety Board News Conference Call. My name is James. I'll be your operator for today's call. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. Please note that this conference is being recorded, and now I'll turn the call over to CSB Hillary Cohen. Ms. Cohen, you may begin.
Thank you. Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Chemical Safety Board's news conference. The CSB is an independent federal agency charged with investigating serious chemical accidents. Today we are here to release our final report and safety recommendations into the Freedom Industry spill. With me today I have our chairperson, Vanessa Allen Sutherland, and our supervisory investigator, Investigator Banks. Following our prepared statements, we will take questions from those in the room and from those on the phone. With that, I'll turn it over to our chairperson, Vanessa Allen Sutherland.
Thank you, Hillary. Good morning, and welcome to the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board's news conference. Today, we are updating the press and the public on the CSB's final investigation report and recommendations from the January 9th, 2014 chemical storage tank leak that contaminated the drinking water of approximately 300,000 residents in 9 counties around Charleston, West Virginia. First, I'd like to thank the investigation team for its work on the report and the related recommendations that we will be discussing today. On the morning of January 9th, 2014, an estimated 10,000 gallons of a chemical called methylcyclohexane methanol, or MCHM, was released into the Elk River when a 46,000 gallon storage tank failed. The tank was owned by Freedom Industries, a company that produced specialty chemicals for the mining, steel, and cement industries, and was located on the banks of the Elk River. The chemical entered the river and flowed 1.5 miles downstream toward a water intake valve, contaminating the water supply. Our investigation found that significant delays occurred in informing the public that the drinking water had been contaminated, potentially putting residents at risk. For example, the State's Department of Environmental Protection identified the MCHM release at 11:05 a.m., but the water company did not notify the public of the do not use order until almost 7 hours after it became aware of the release. And we discovered that nationwide, municipal water providers do not have programs to determine the location of potential chemical contamination sources. They also do not necessarily have written plans to respond to chemical spills like the one that occurred here in Charleston, West Virginia. My fellow board members and I are concerned about the potential for similar accidents to occur elsewhere. This incident emphasizes the need for business owners, state regulators, government officials, and public utilities to work together to protect water supply systems. Based on our findings, our investigation team has made safety recommendations that we believe should be adopted. These recommendations will help assure that the public's access to safe water is protected. I would like to invite lead investigator Johnny Banks to briefly discuss the team's findings and recommendations now. Mr. Banks and the team will go into more detail tonight at a public meeting at 6 p.m. Eastern Time here at the 4 Points Sheraton Hotel. And after that presentation, the board may vote on those recommendations. So please welcome Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Chairperson Sutherland. While there are steps water providers can take to reduce the impact of a leak after it occurs, the best way to protect the public is to not have the leak in the first place. This can be accomplished through inspections and other preventive measures, but we found through an extensive technical analysis of the MCHM tanks at Freedom Industries were not internally inspected for at least 10 years before the January 2014 incident, which resulted in missed opportunities to find damage and prevent the leak. And we found that no comprehensive above-ground storage tank law existed in West Virginia at the time of the release. As a result, Freedom Industries failed to have protective measures in place that could have potentially stopped the chemical from reaching the Elk River. Since the incident, there have been a number of reforms, including the passage of the Above Ground Storage Tank Act in West Virginia. These new regulations would have required the tanks at Freedom Industries to be surrounded by an adequate secondary containment structure and required proper maintenance and corrosion prevention, including internal inspections and the certification process. The question that many in the Charleston area are still asking is, what was the impact of the MCHM on the water? Our investigation concluded that while there is some information available on the acute effects of MCHM, little is still known about the chronic health impact of exposure at low concentration levels. The chemical safety data sheets, which are required by law, do not provide enough information to determine whether water is safe to use or drink if contaminated. Our report includes proposed recommendations to the supplier of chemicals to address such gaps in the safety data sheets. We will go into greater detail about the report tonight at our public meeting. Some of the key lessons learned include above-ground storage tank owners should establish regular inspection monitoring of tanks and coordinate with nearby water utilities and emergency response organizations to ensure that they provide adequate information about their stored chemicals for effective planning in the event of a leak. Water utilities should engage with their local emergency planning committees or state emergency response commission to obtain information that can be used to identify whether water intakes are potentially at risk of contamination from hazardous chemicals in the event of a spill or release. Water utilities should assess the capabilities of their water treatment systems to address the potential leaks for all potential sources of significant contamination. And where feasible, water utilities should ensure laboratory testing methods are available to detect the presence or measure the concentration of potential contaminants. I look forward to discussing our investigation findings and recommendations tonight in greater detail. For now, I would like to turn things back over to Chairperson Sutherland.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. And first, I'd like to commend the investigation team for its excellent work. I look forward to the team's presentation tonight and to the discussion amongst my fellow board members. My message here today is that what happened here in Charleston was preventable. This incident could have been avoided if regular inspections had been conducted on these storage tanks, and the effects could have been mitigated with enhanced communication and pre-planning. I strongly believe that safety is a shared responsibility and that public officials, chemical companies, water utilities, and emergency responders must all work together to protect the community's water sources and prevent similar incidents in the future. Now, lead investigator Banks and I will be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Can you actually describe the corrosion?
We're going to ask to try and have the people on the phone here, if you could state your name and affiliation, and I'm going to give you the mic so people on the phone can actually hear what you're saying in the room. I'll hold it for you.
I'm Bob Aaron, a reporter with WCHS TV and WVAH TV here in Charleston. Can you actually describe what caused the leak in the tank and over what period did this actually occur? There's been issues about this, about how much warning they should have given to the water company regarding the leak and whether they got timely notice and how long this process went on for.
Thank you. Well, as we teased part of this event, it came to our understanding that the tanks had not been inspected for a considerable period of time. The corrosion that we observed in the tank after we emptied it and cut samples to a lab indicated there was corrosion that's consistent with pitting type activity. The corrosion led to the formation of two holes that were observed in tank 396, one other hole that was found in another tank that was in MCHM service. But in all three MCHM tanks, there was significant signs of corrosion throughout all three tanks. This was corroborated through as many as 5 or 6 different independent tank inspectors that use their apparatus to gauge the level of corrosion in those 3 tanks.
What actually caused that rust? The materials that were stored in the tank, water on the outside, condensation?
The corrosion products that were in the tank could be any number of contributors to the corrosion. Air, the tanks had holes in the roof, air, water, and just the presence in the tank itself, carbon steel, the materials of construction. What we emphasize in our report is a systematic programmed approach to inspecting the tanks would have found these holes, the corrosion. If the inspection had taken place prior to January 9th, the holes would have been discovered, the corrosion would have been discovered, and crews would have dictated that the floor should have been replaced.
So common sense inspections would have prevented this incident?
That is our position, yes.
Hi, Ken Ward from the Charleston Gazette-Mail. Just to follow up on two things that Bob and Aaron asked about there. One, can you explain in a little more detail the study that you all had performed on how long the material may have been leaking and whether or not there was some connection between the weather and a sudden release, or whether you believe the corrosion was going on for some period of hours or days? And second, to put a finer point on this other question about what caused the corrosion, can the CSB tell us anything about whether or not the specific material that was contained in this tank was appropriate for this sort of tank, or whether it would have contributed or caused this corrosion?
I'll try to capture all of those right there. First, the manner in which the corrosion developed over an extended period of time. As I said earlier, our position was that if there had been inspection, that it would have been found. The exact timing on that, it's impossible for us to ascertain, but our analysis of the tank and observing the type of failure and considering the weather conditions on the day of the incident, there was a hard freeze that the Charleston area experienced. We know that there was a pathway for water to reside underneath the tank. If the holes were pre-existing, then that water would have, that was maybe leaching out of the tank or being forced in, would have frozen. We speak to a phenomenon called frost heaving that could have contributed to the tank buckling somewhat or being shifted on its foundation. And once that water thawed and dislodged, then there was a pathway for the contents of that tank to make its way through fairly permeable soil and then along a secondary containment that did prevent the flow to the Elk River. So again, going back to the original position that we've taken with this report, is that a API, American Petroleum Institute, study or inspection would have found these holes prior to January 9th.
James, do you want to see if there's any questions on the line?
Certainly. If you have a question, press *1 on your phone. You may need to, if you're using a speakerphone, you may need to pick up the handset first before pressing the numbers. So if you have a question, press *1. And we do have a question from Angelo Steinberger, ABC News.
Hey, it's Daniel Steinberger from News. Thank you for taking the call. You mentioned the health effects, that little is still known. Why is that, and do you think we'll ever know the long-term health effects of what happened?
Well, based on our review of studies that were done by Eastman prior to the incident and by the National Toxicology Program after the incident, there's no observed effects that we have been able to ascertain from humans that were exposed to this event. And moving forward, there was some indication that there's no, from the time this incident occurred in January of 2014, there were no low birth weights or any other maladies that were reportedly associated with the event. There were 369 citizens that went to the hospital, 13 of which were admitted, and none of those have reported any recurring chronic long-term effects from the exposure. So those are the data that we were able to fold into this report to give folks some sense of where the potential threat and real threat lie with MCHM.
And just to follow up, so are you concerned though that there might be long-term health effects for people?
What we would look to the fact that the trials that were run didn't show any effects to folks at concentrations below 1 part per million. We know that the concentrations on the intake of the water treatment facility was at 3 parts per million. On the outflow of the treatment of the water treatment facility was at 2 parts per million. And at 1 parts per million, there were no observed effects.
James, do we have any other questions on the line?
No, we don't have any questions. If you do have a question, press star 1 on your phone.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the room and ask, I'm going to come back to you.
Hi, I'm Blaine Carriger. I'm a reporter with WSAZ. So both of you kind of talked about the communication aspect of all of this. What are some of the ways that you think the communication between public health agencies can be improved in the future?
As the Chair Sutherland said, it's a shared responsibility. And in a community such as this, we would expect that the sharing of information, the pre-planning, the cooperation of the companies that are operating, that they would all form a partnership to ensure that if there is a potential threat, that the companies that are would be harmed by that they're aware of that, and that the companies that would be on the receiving end of that they have a plan to mitigate any harmful products and materials that might come their way.
And I would just add that water utilities should engage with their LEPCs, the local emergency planning commissions, or SERCs, which are the state emergency response commissions, as much as possible to obtain information that can be used and pre-known about whether water intake systems are potentially at risk in those communities, and whether the types of hazardous chemicals, chemical constituents, have been known, and what the level of risk is in the event of a chemical release. So communication should be both on the front end and then during an event, as Investigator Banks said, understanding how to best mitigate the consequences, the appropriate treatments, the appropriate methodologies, the appropriate warnings to the public. Really should start on the pre-planning side so that people are prepared in the event that there is a leak, and to understand the scope of the risk.
And to go back to the room, Mr. Ward had a follow-up question. I'm sorry, I cut him off.
Yes, I was just trying to ask Mr. Banks about the specific issue that's been raised here locally about whether or not the MCHM, or the crude MCHM, or the shore flock, whichever you're calling it, had a specific potential to corrode this sort of carbon steel tank. And I'm wondering if the CSB looked at that issue and could tell us anything about what you found if you did.
We don't have any specifics on the role that MCHM played in the corrosion or the accelerating the corrosion of the tank. Our position was that the lack of inspection of the tank would have contributed more than anything to the state of affairs. On any given day, there's materials ranging from sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid, that are stored in tanks safely, and a sound, prudent, systematic approach to inspecting those tanks prevents this type of event from occurring. I think that's the position that we've taken with this report.
Was the belated warning that the water company got, would that still give them enough time to close their intakes? They obviously had some reasons why perhaps they didn't do that, because they didn't want to have to close down the system and firefighting and other issues. But
Well, at this stage, hindsight 2020, but I think the fact that they were told that it was one type of agent and it turned out to be another type, that contributed to the delay in response. I think they were operating with the best information that they had at the time that they were making their decisions. One of the drivers for that was, as you mentioned, a low inventory in the tanks. That if they shut the gates and they ran out of water, then it would take an exceedingly long time to restore levels adequately enough to get the system up and running again. So those were the main drivers, were just the ability to maintain service and not realizing or understanding or appreciating the fact that if the MCHM overwhelmed their system, that the consequences that would.
So they had enough time, but they didn't know what they were essentially dealing with.
I think knowledge is power. If they had known that the material was going to be not a flocculent, then they might have behaved differently when they made their decisions to keep the gates open.
Mr. Banks, Jeff Jenkins with West Virginia Metro News. I noticed in the draft report that you encourage the parent company of West Virginia American Water to, saying that you have the opportunity to learn from this and make sure other water utilities under your jurisdiction or that you own can take advantage of this situation, or can you express or comment on that a little bit?
Sure. We would hope that companies beyond just the American Water Works Association would draw from this. We are a non-regulatory, non-enforcement agency, so our really stock and trade is to make recommendations that are rooted in reality, that folks can find value in applying to their situations. There are water companies throughout this country that can benefit from this, that can learn, share through their networks, so that if they're in proximity to an operating chemical plant, that they would take the initiative to go to that plant, find out what's there, and if there's something that could shut them down or cause them to disrupt their operation, to have some mitigation plans to prevent that from happening. That's really the best thing that we could possibly hope would be that another water company contacted us and says that we read your report and we incorporated this practice moving forward.
James, are there any other questions on the line?
No, we have no questions.
In the room?
Hi, Ken Ward again from the Charleston Gazette-Mail. I'm wondering, given the comments that, and this is for Chairperson Sutherland, I'm wondering, given the comments about the need for water utilities around the country to be looking at this sort of thing, I'm wondering why the CSB didn't issue a recommendation to the Environmental Protection Agency that they issue a new rule on the Safe Drinking Water Act that would require source water protection of the sort you're talking about and the sort that West Virginia incorporated in the legislation passed after this bill.
Well, I think we can, Investigator Banks and I can both ask that, because as you heard, the investigation team will be presenting the final report to the board this evening, where we may vote on the recommendations. I think that there are a lot of valuable lessons learned that indicate there are a number of steps that water providers can take around the country to reduce the impact after a leak occurs and to be preventative and make sure that they're communicating. But as far as the team's recommendation for us as a board to consider, I think there's a lot of great work in the draft. I certainly am open to having Investigator Banks discuss that particular question, but I think there's a lot of very valuable recommendation and related lessons learned in the draft that we will be discussing in more detail and potentially voting on tonight. Did you want to add anything about that?
Just very briefly, we considered the possibility of where the recommendations would be best suited, and almost from the very outset there were activities from other organizations and agencies that were addressing the very same issues. And so with the implementation of TSCA and SB 423, those are elements that can help to ensure that the type of events that occur here don't occur again. The EPA is tasked with implementing TSCA, and they're in the early stages of that. There may be an opportunity at some point in time to offer comments on a request for information, for instance, and Those are, I think, helpful. We've done that in the past with West Fertilizer where we provided commentary. So it's kind of appreciating the fact that there is activity that's not consigned to what we do, but still with EPA, there's just so many chemicals that would fall into their purview that this affords an opportunity to prioritize those chemicals and address the issue moving forward.
We have one question from the back.
Hi, I'm Ashton Morrow with West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Two things, one very quickly. So I just want to be clear that you all do not know that this leak started on January 9th. You do not know if it started prior to that date. Or is there something conclusive in this report that says it did start on January 9th, the day that it was reported?
No, we can't say with that surety that the leak started on January 9th.
So this, my second question, I'm going to ask, but you all might not be able to answer. There are two things that happened as a result of this incident, one of which is the above-ground storage tank law that was passed here in the state of West Virginia. A second is a federal law that requires the EPA to start reviewing these chemicals, essentially. As someone that the public, as an organization that the public looks to as an expert, can you all comment on whether or not either of those pieces of legislation go far enough to protecting the public interest and public health?
While we welcome, as I said, any activity by other agencies to address the issues that were brought forth with this incident, we think that with the implication of these two activities, that at the state level, things can be managed a lot more efficiently than with big regulations. And so there's an opportunity for the state to, and for the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection to have a role. They know the lay of the land and the equipment and can be positioned to address those issues.
And just to add to that from a more agency perspective, part of our strategic outreach is that any state or federal activity that advances chemical safety is good. We try to review those, and we're very supportive whenever there are steps taken that we think are going to help keep the public informed, take preventative measures to prevent incidents from happening, or have appropriate steps for mitigation. I think for an agency like ours that is focused on root causes, I think the takeaway for us is we were very encouraged to see the very swift action that West Virginia did take while a lot of the investigations were occurring to take a look at the above ground storage tank requirements. So I do think in that regard, we were very encouraged that early on there was state activity, and certainly as Mr. Banks indicated, at some point in the future, we certainly would be commenting as TSCA and other types of federal level reform unfold and are implemented. We certainly would weigh in based on the investigative facts and lessons learned that we have conducted and try to contribute a useful voice in that way.
Hi, I'm Rusty Marks. I'm with the State Journal. I think that I know the answer to this question, and I think that you've alluded to it, but the holes that you found in the tank, were they in the floor of the tank or one of the walls of the tank?
They were in the floor.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
The board has previously recommended, following other investigations here, the creation of local and perhaps even state chemical accident prevention programs. That recommendation is not carried forth in this report, but the draft seems to have some confusion. Are you all under the impression that the Public Water Supply Safety Study Commission has recommended to the legislature that be adopted? And could you explain what your all's current position and thinking on that recommendation from the BEAR report is?
Well, as you mentioned, that recommendation is issued forth after the Bayer incident, and that was 2000. Well, the incident occurred in 2008, so subsequent to that. And it's gone through various stakeholders, starting with the Kanawha County Department of Health. The initiative of that recommendation spurred the creation of the working group of 4. And they have carried the ball forward, so to speak, in advocating for that piece of work. We have monitored the progress of that recommendation from its inception, and it is still alive. It is still one that we're eager to see it move forward. But recently we have engaged in some dialogue with the Kanawha County Department of Health to develop a recommendation that will go on a parallel path that can help to address those same issues. So it's the Bayer recommendation is still alive and active. We've not stepped away from it, and we are anxious to see it brought to closure.
We have one more in the room, and here you go, sir. You're good? Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and conclude today's news conference. We'll be holding a public meeting in the room next door at 6 p.m. We encourage everyone to attend. We'll be webcasting the meeting. The link is available on our website at www.csb.gov, as is a copy of the draft report, the safety recommendations, and our news release. Thank you, everyone, for coming.